Hello everybody. Warm welcome back to DevCamp session number 10. Today is November 4th, 2021, and mostly we are going to talk about anything about UI. And this ambulance telling us that somebody is in danger and it is not an extra noise. So we hope that the problem is going to be fixed. And that's it. Let's go to Tats. Let's have a UI and talk about the UI, how the UI is working, how is mainly the different things about the differences between UI in Holochain applications or peer-to-peer decentralized application with a centralized architecture.
Thank you, that. Yeah, so for today, uh, we're just gonna give a quick overview of um, what it feels like to build UI with a distributed app framework like Holochain, and um, not go too deep on like framework specific stuff, but more of general things that everyone would need to sort of know to have a smooth experience in building the front end. Quick presentation. And then after this, we could have like a Q&A as well regarding UI. The first thing I want to show is this. Um, this is like a diagram I made just to show where UI is placed in terms of like the bigger picture. So um, your UI usually interacts with the conductor. So your UI usually calls the zone functions that we've built so far, for example, for this game. And the UI would make that call to the conductor. And there is a library called Conductor API, which allows you to make these zone function calls. Yeah, we'll show how that kind of looks like later. And the conductor also could send you signals. I think the next session would be about signals, but your conductor could send signals to your UI, and then your UI would need to handle those in an appropriate way, right? Um, and your conductor could receive information from the DHT or also from other agents directly, depending on the context. Like, for example, if someone call remotes or does a remote call into your conductor, then you could also receive data from those. So this is the kind of overview for UI. Yeah, so mainly your UI interacts with your conductor, and in a holochain context, your conductor is also running locally for a particular agent, right? If you are running in Holo, your conductor lives on a Holo port, and basically your UI is presented in the browser, and that's gonna be a lot different. It's gonna include a lot of different components, so I'm not gonna go too deep into that. But anyway, so there's that. So that's like the overview. Okay.
Tat, let's
Yeah.
let's wait here to see if there is any question. Is there any question so far about the general overview on this mapping?
Yeah, would it make sense to say that the conductor serves the UI? Like is it the job of the conductor to do that, or are they kind of separate things and just talk to each other?
Yeah, you could say that it's it's like the UI kind of mediates what the agent wants to really do within that particular holochain application, right? So, um, how do I say this? It it yeah, in a sense, because your conductor stores all the data that you've created, as well as any part of the DHT that you're responsible holding, and yeah, it gets that delivered in the UI for agents to see. So yeah, in a sense,
Okay.
you could say that too. Yeah.
Is there
Okay.
any other question? Okay, let me ask a couple of questions here, Tats. So, signals, it means when there is something changed in the DHT and we are going to query blah, 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 and notify the UI. So it means UI cannot receive a signal directly from a conductor. It's received from a conductor API. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It means
Yes.
UI is registered as a POP-SUB registered to Conductor API. If there is any signal, Conductor tells the Conductor API, and Conductor API also can notify the subscribers.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what about calling as a remote call? What is the scenario? You are going to cover it later, or we can cover it right now? It means two agents want to talk to each other. What was the process of that one?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so from the UI's perspective, it's pretty much how do I say this? The same. It's more about, because from the UI you're still making that zone function call, right? That would potentially make a remote call to the other conductor. So remote call is that it's a feature available in HTK that allows you to directly make a remote call onto another agent's cells zone function, right? So um, that's useful, for example, if you want to have some sort of private transaction that doesn't need to involve the DHT, or private messaging or private game, whatever. So that also happens from the Conductor API. Basically, you make a zone call. So we'll show you later how it looks like the actual format of having your UI connected to these Conductor API. But yeah, um, I guess that's what I could say for the remote call for now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Generally, you could pretty much build your UI with any framework or no framework at all. As uh, a web app, kind of like web UI. Or actually, you could also make a desktop client, anything actually. Mobile, you could probably use something like a hybrid framework and have the Conductor API get exposed to those UIs. But pretty much any of those would require uh, establishing connection to the conductor through the Holochain Conductor API if you're running um, or if you expect your app to run on how do you call this, uh, as a holochain node, like a local holochain node, not as a hosted node. And then if you want your UI to also be able to accommodate holo hosted environment, then you would also need to have your UI interact with another um, kind of like library, which is called the Web SDK for Holohost. But yeah, what's important right now is I think the Holochain Conductor API. So I could show you guys. Can you guys see my browser?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is the GitHub repository for the Holochain Conductor API implemented in Node.js. So yeah, you would mainly be connecting through the Holochain Conductor using this as of the moment. And reading the instruction is pretty much straightforward to get connected. So this library exposes this class called app WebSocket, which has a connect method allowing you to connect to a locally running um, Conductor API. And then after getting connected, you could basically make a in connecting to the Conductor itself, you would need to provide the port, the timeout that you would have for your Zoom calls, as well as any of the signal callbacks that you expect from that would be needed for your Holochain app. And then after that, you could make, a call like call Zoom, and then you would be providing these things. So CAP is short for capability, I think token, which is, so this is a thing that you would need. For example, if you would need to make a remote call, the one I kind of explained a while ago. So you could set certain functions in the Holochain app that you make to require a cap grant. And if the agent doesn't have the right cap token, then it would not have the cap grant to make those calls. So yeah, but anyway, that's not that much important right now. But this is like the base setting, and then you would be providing the Zoom name, the function name, and any payload that you need for your Zoom calls. Yeah. So there's that, and then there's also the Holohost web. So there's also the Holohost web SDK. This is similar, but is used for any application that would like to get connected in the Holo hosting network or provide their applications as a hosted application. And I think there's not much available information yet for us to be able to really use it. But soon I think we're gonna be able to have some sort of publisher portal where we can deploy our application as a hosted app. But yeah, there is a web SDK for it as well. Pretty similar. You would establish a connection, and you would be providing your app name, whether you would, yeah. So I'm not gonna go in details for this, but you could check it out. But yeah, so this Holochain Conductor API, pretty much something that any UI would need, definitely. Oh, and I also highly suggest, sorry, I forgot to say this. Highly suggest going to this resource here. It's called Cell Client. So the Cell Client is useful to sort of just use both the Holochain Conductor API and the Holo app WebSocket to make your UI kind of ready to get connected to either one, kind of like seamlessly. So I also would suggest checking this out. I'll paste this in the chat as well. Yeah.
So maybe I can throw out an idea. Maybe it'll help. I think it'll help myself, and maybe it'll help other people as well. So you can write you can write your UI in whatever you want, and you can have that running wherever you want. You don't necessarily need to bundle it with any of your Zomes or any of your Rust code or anything. And you can deploy your web app on the launcher and then boot up in a dev environment or something, the UI, as long as it's using this Conductor API and you're pointing it at the right port and calling the right zone functions, it should work the same way. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So when you're testing, you could just use the HC-CLI to boot up a conductor using the sandbox, I think. And then you could install any DNA that you would like to test using. So yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we can go to the next. So some of the things that I think would be really useful knowing early on is kind of like some of the unique things that you would encounter in building the UI for a distributed app or building the actual app itself. So um, in the UI, you would need, so this is one of the biggest change, I think, if you are, especially if you use to building centralized apps, is that you will need to deal with eventual consistency in the UI more often than I personally thought I would. So eventual consistency basically means that you know Holochain is a distributed network, and whenever someone publishes a piece of data, it doesn't get propagated to the entire network instantly, right? Unlike in a centralized system, because everybody is accessing the same thing, basically, when that gets updated, everybody has the updated data. Um, but in a DHT, it takes time for data to get gossip. And so what happens is people tend to use signals for your UI to have kind of like a snappy behavior, right? So for example, in messaging, when I send a message, um, I don't like for others to have to fetch the latest data from the HT. Like if you would like them to get the message pushed, then a signal would be used. The thing is, you have to be careful with dealing with data that you receive via signals in the UI because how should I say this? For example, for example, what's a good idea? Um, for example, in a chess game, right? If you received your opponent's move via signal and a you want to make the next move based on that last move. Um, if ever you would need to, for example, link these two entries, let's just say they are separate entries, your zone call could fail and you could be like when it happened to me for the first time, I was kind of confused for a few hours, wondering why it wasn't working. But basically, since remote signals can really deliver data almost instantly to other agents, if you operate on that particular piece of data, you might be um, you might fail some of the system validations that Holochain has. If ever they need to sort of ensure the existence of that particular data that you retrieve via signals. So yeah, I hope I'm not overcomplicating it, but basically what could happen is that Holochain tries to look for that data in the DHT and it doesn't get anything because it hasn't propagated to to the agent's neighborhood, to the storage arc. And that would fail whatever zone call that you're making. So in the example that I was making, it was the next move of chess. So yeah, there are different workarounds to that, which I could explain in the next slide. So you could, for example, make a differentiation in how you handle data that you retrieve from the DHT and the data you retrieve via signals. Or you could also basically just um, make sure that that data that you retrieved via signals already exist within uh, kind of like already exist and can be retrieved from the DHT before executing anything on that particular data. So that that makes it how should I say this? That kind of that's some of the ways that you could deal with eventual consistency. Yeah. Um, and
There,
then
there is a question here,
yeah,
Tats, that
sure,
so
sure.
signals bypass validation, signals data bypass validations.
Um, yeah, well, bypass. In terms of when it is getting executed. So for example, if you have a remote signal within your zone function, then that remote signal gets executed um, before those validations are even operated on. So yeah, basically signals are separated from validation. Like they get executed at the time when zone functions are executed within the conductor.
Generally, let's say that signal, it is just a peer-to-peer communication. It is different than DHT. You might connect to others without pushing something in DHT. So split it up the topic. But all in all, the topic of because somehow for any reason you want to do handshake before anything, in a transaction application, you want to be sure that the other party is online. You need to ping, you need to send and talk and do a handshake. In that case, the signal, it is just do something. There is no topic about the DHT. But in the scenario that you are pushing something in DHT and also to have a better good feeling in the UI, like a chess or other things. So you are pushing that data to DHT and then sending that data directly via remote call to other agents. So it is one scenario you can do. The data that you can send can be anything, but generally when you push something to DHT, the workflow, there is a workflow when you create entry or update entry. In your client, as an agent, when you do some ops or operation, the validation is running. So I hope I could cover. I don't want to go deeper that make you confused, but I think.
Can I just ask something? Is this correct? Signal is more like a messaging, but the validation is primarily performed on entries you would put into networks. It's almost like writing something, persisting something into the common shared database.
That is true. That is true. Yes. validation, that if you implemented validation, it's going to be run on your agent at the end of workflow when you finish. So you put it, it means not at the end of workflow. So before putting your chain, the validation is going to be run, and then it's going to be your local source, your chain, source chain, which is local, and then push to the DHT. And also others are going to validate it. It is a one topic. Call remote, which is signaling other agents or talking to other agent, it can be connected to this topic. It cannot be connected. But you are true. Yes, Lily.
Continuing from where we stopped a while ago, the next thing that you would be that would be relatively new is that you would have to deal with more kind of like hashes, because it's used a lot in a holochain context. And if ever you would need to have, so mostly hashes are returned from holochain um, in a buffer or in a uint8 array, and you would need to basically kind of like serialize them to have them stored as a string. And this library is useful for that because it already has most of the holochain data types in TypeScript equivalents. And you could also use things like, not sure if it was here. Yeah, so you could use functions like this as well. So um, you could use serialized hash to turn any hash you receive from holochain into a string, and vice versa. Like, for example, you would need to provide a hash for your function's argument. You could use this as well. So this one is pretty useful. So there's that. And then for common pitfalls, yeah, I've explained about signals. I think if your project have any plans on deploying on the whole hosting network as well, I think it would be one good thing to think about is making less number of zone calls, because unlike in a holochain, like unlike in a scenario where you're running your conductor locally, like in Holo, you would still be making network calls for those zone calls. So, for example, if you need any combination of data from your holochain side, then it would be nice to just make um, cross zone calls using the call feature for in HTK, and get all those data in one zone call from your UI. So some things like that are also things that are worth, I guess, thinking about when you're building your UI. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. You know. So let me stop sharing. Yeah.
Actually, would you mind popping that back up again? I'm still kind of processing
Sure.
the last slide there. Thanks.
No problem at all. There you go.
Yeah. What do you mean by discerning the data in the UI? I don't think I got that.
Yeah. So the thing is, if 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 your app would have any zone calls that would use another entries, and let's say that that entry can be received via signals, So for example, one example is like um, in a messaging application, right? When an agent saw the message, if that agent would like to let the other agents know that he read the message, then he could make that agent could make a link from that message data to his agent pub key. Let's just say. And the thing is, those messages could be received through signals, right? Because if I send a message in the group chat, um, I would like to rapidly notify all the members in the group chat. Then I can, after finishing committing the entry to the DHT, I could then kind of let the other agents know through signals that I sent this message. And if you, as the receiver of that message, act on that data, the Zoom call could fail. So, because how do I say that? How do I say this? If you're gonna make a link from that entry to your agent pub key, the Zoom function could fail because the Holochain conductor would try to get that message entry from the DHT. But the thing is, the DHT hasn't reached consistency yet, so you can't see that data yet. And so your conductor would think that you are trying to create a link from an entry that doesn't exist. So what you have to do there is either um, you wouldn't allow certain data to be operated on. For example, if it's any data that received from signals, then you wouldn't work on it, or you wouldn't make it possible to be worked on. That's what I mean by discerning it. Or you could just make it so that any data that you will do something on, you make sure that it exists in the DHT first, right? Any dependency basically that your Zoom call would have. It would be nice to make sure that it exists before doing something with it, because um, Holochain will check the existence of those um, in things like updating an entry or creating a link between two entries, stuff like that. Yeah, I hope that
Yep, that made sense.
made sense. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Sure.
It was a really important and nice topic, and it's really tricky. A quick brief again to see what does it mean when you are sending a signal. So try to use it as much as possible, or take care that the business logic is not going to be heavily on a DHT. It means you receive a signal. Before signal, something happened from the other parties, and you are going to add extra logic to the DHT again. It means you and I, or two agents, I'm doing something here to DHT, I'm notifying you, and then continue my job that I did here with another logic. Because in a DHT, maybe the consistency is not there, and you are going to create a link that this one told you, hey, I made this entry. You can add a link to that entry from your agent ID. So maybe the entry is not propagated, and DHT is not reached to the stable state or the consistency, the eventual consistency. And that's why it's going to be tricky. Got the point? It means use signal in a way that is not going to challenge you, is not going to challenge the logic that, hey, you want to do something that I don't see it. You want to make a logic, or you want to add extra meaning to the things that it is not already existed. it was the main topic about the signaling and concern we have about the signals. And also Otis mentioned, was asking about running the business rule. It was also another issue or topic when you are signaling, because signal is a direct one. It is not running. You're talking to each other directly. DHT is another operation running. All of them are tricky. For sure, you can somehow architect, or you can find a pattern for yourself or for others' experience. But all in all, they are tricky topics in the signaling. Thank you, Tats. Thank you for your
Thank you, Dave.
presentation, content, and also I recommend that in the Holochain-in-action, we reviewed a couple of projects, especially about the UI with different patterns. The most recent one that I shared, it was where we reviewed everything in the UI, the pattern, component-based store, how to use a profile, so on and so forth. I recommend to review those videos as well. That being said, take care and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.